Have you ever felt that really intense frustration, the kind that just makes you want to lash out? Maybe it's a tough conversation or a project that's gone completely sideways, or I don't know, just trying to assemble some stubborn piece of furniture for just a second, right? That outburst feels like it might actually help, but then of course nothing really changes. The frustration's still there. Maybe it's even worse. Well, what if entire nations, even their leaders, sometimes act on that exact same impulse? Today we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating insights from Nimrod Israeli. We're looking at excerpts from his work, When Leaders Choose Conflict Over Creation. And he really digs into the deeper mechanics behind why leaders and sometimes whole countries seem to just default to conflict, even when it seems totally illogical.
Yeah, and the core question this material looks at is, I think, critical for all of us right now. It asks, what happens if societies fail to combine economic and social complexities? And conversely, what are the visible consequences when they do manage to get that alignment right? We're seeing the answers play out globally, really, right in front of us. Think about persistent poverty, hunger, economic stagnation, and yeah, obviously war. These aren't just separate crises, The author suggests they all stem from a kind of fundamental failure to manage those complexities together.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this dynamic, the author introduces a core framework. He calls it Ginordo. Can you walk us through what that actually means and why he thinks it's so essential for, well, basically any successful human effort?
Absolutely. So Ginordo is his fundamental framework. It basically states that every successful human endeavor has these three essential elements: energy, structure, and direction. You can sort of think of it as a universal formula for creation almost. Energy is the raw potential to drive. Structure is the organizing principle, how it's put together. And direction is the clear purpose, the goal, where it's all headed.
Energy, structure, direction. Okay, so that framework, Ginordo, that's going to be our lens for looking at all this material. Our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear then. We're going to try and unpack why leaders might choose conflict, as a method of governance. How does that choice actually play out in the real world? And maybe the biggest question, is there a different path? Is there another way, even for us as individuals?
It's really quite insightful stuff. The author draws this a real surprising parallel between that frustrated kid's outburst you mentioned right at the start and a whole nation's decision to actually wage war. And it points to a pretty uncomfortable idea that Homo sapiens, as a species, we might be emotionally underdeveloped for the sheer level of technological and economic complexity we now control. I mean, imagine a leader, their finger metaphorically or maybe not so metaphorically on a button, but emotionally maybe not that far removed from a tribal chief 30,000 years ago, still reacting to frustration in these primal ways.
That is a powerful image and, yeah, a bit unsettling. The author really focuses on this idea of frustration, doesn't he? He says, look, frustration itself isn't the problem. It's natural. It's a signal, a sign that something's out of balance, needs aren't being met, energy is building up inside a system, and it needs to go somewhere. For kids, it's when what they want is way beyond what they can do. For nations, he argues, it comes up when the leadership's ambitions, or maybe just the system's pressures, outpace the actual capacity to deliver prosperity or justice or security. What really matters, he says, is what happens next.
Exactly. When those internal tensions start mounting and social cohesion starts to fray, that frustration builds up, like steam trapped in a sealed chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And without a constructive outlet, some way to channel it positively, that pressure eventually just bursts out violently. Sometimes it goes outwards, right? It's directed by a failing government against some foreign enemy. Other times, and this is tragic, it turns inward and it starts consuming the nation's own people.
Okay, so if it's like a pressure cooker, why do some leaders seem to actively choose war as the release valve? The author makes this really striking argument that sometimes wars aren't really about winning territory or getting resources primarily. They're actually used as a tool of governance itself. What does he mean by that?
Well, he argues that war can become a desperate way for leaders to survive politically. It's a method maybe to buy time, freeze elections, silence any dissent, and kind of hold fractured coalitions together, all under this, illusion of national purpose. It's a crude tool maybe, but it's familiar. It's one that diverts all that restless energy from a fragmented society away from its crumbling leadership and points it towards a convenient enemy, whether that's external or internal.
Wow. That makes a chilling kind of sense, especially when you think about all the energy and resources that could be building things, creating prosperity, but instead they get consumed by destruction. It's like you said,
Yeah.
the pressure cooker exploding, or maybe like a wildfire of entropy, that tendency towards disorder and chaos and just spreading.
And this brings up a really important question, doesn't it? Why do struggling societies, instead of turning that frustration into fuel for renewal, for building something better, why do they seem doomed to just repeat these cycles of destruction? The author points to a pretty harsh truth here. Leaders and the people they govern don't always have the same interests. It seems obvious, but in fragile states or failing ones, leaders who are basically fighting for their own survival might actually provoke or prolong conflict, not to help the nation, but just to protect themselves. Remember that quote from Samuel Johnson back in 1775? Patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. It's cynical, sure, but the author suggests the pattern fits sometimes.
And he uses some real-world examples to illustrate these mechanisms, right? Leadership, frustration, structure, and action. He specifically mentions Israel and Russia. And it's important we stress, this isn't about taking sides or endorsing any viewpoint. He's purely observing the dynamics he's describing. For instance, he notes that when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023, they were likely sensing Israel's internal vulnerabilities. There have been months of protests, accusations of a government coup, eroding public trust. And for a moment, at least, the war seemed to restore a sense of purpose, some unity within Israel.
But then, as the conflict dragged on, doubts started creeping back in among Israelis. Was this war being prolonged maybe to mask leadership failures? Or to delay elections? Or silence opposition? And this is a historical pattern, right? We see echoes elsewhere. Russia, for instance, he suggests, walks a similar path. Putin's invasion of Ukraine came after years of, domestic frustration and deepening economic decay. War seemed to promise unity, a revival of national pride, maybe that dream of restoring Russia's status as a military superpower. But instead of stabilizing things, it seems to have just deepened the isolation and the hardship.
So the author is saying what unites these cases, and probably many others, isn't the geography or the specific politics, it's the fundamental mechanism. Leaders, when they're confronted by this rising internal entropy, this spreading disorder, they instinctively reach for conflict to divert that frustration away from themselves. But, as he puts it, the universal law of increasing complexity teaches us something here. Energy that's expelled without a constructive structure and a clear direction, well, it doesn't just disappear. It rebounds. It feeds the very entropy it was meant to escape. It spreads destruction right back to where it started.
Yeah, and this brings us to a really critical distinction the author makes. It's between what he calls packages of destruction and packages of creation. Destructive military packages, let's face it, they're deeply embedded in political traditions. Leaders know them by heart. They get refined over generations. They're sort of off-the-shelf solutions in a dark way. But in contrast, packages of creation, the ones you actually need to build thriving economies and resilient societies, they remain much more elusive, much harder to develop. Think about something like agriculture, for example. It needs this really sophisticated blend of knowledge, ecosystem design.
Yeah.
But often, these vital systems are just left outdated. Progress is really difficult.
Right. And because many leaders, maybe they lack the tools or the understanding or even the will to upgrade these vital creative systems, they just revert to the playbook they know best, managing conflict. So it's not necessarily that they want to destroy things, but maybe they just haven't learned how to build effectively. They lack the recipe for transformation. What does he mean by that recipe for transformation? What would that even look like?
Well, he implies this recipe isn't simple. It's definitely not a quick fix. It requires a really deep understanding of what society actually needs. It means fostering genuine collaboration between different groups, investing in long-term solutions, not just short-term fixes, and a willingness to adapt, to evolve, rather than just react defensively. Essentially, it means consciously applying that Ginordo framework we talked about, energy, structure, and direction, but not for short-term political gain or just diversion.
Yeah.
Applying it for sustainable, systemic development. Although sometimes he notes the calculation turns even colder. If a leader genuinely believes they can no longer grow their own capabilities, they might actually choose to destroy the capabilities of others, just hoping to outlast their rivals' collapse.
But when the whole system degrades, surely no one escapes the consequences. That sounds like setting fire to your neighbor's field when you know the wind's blowing straight towards your own house. What starts as maybe a strategic effort to unify a nation often just ends in deeper social fragmentation, economic devastation, and, irreversible decay for everyone involved.
That's precisely why the author emphasizes that emotional maturity isn't just a personal trait for a leader, it's a system capability. And systems that lack it, well, they'll turn every little crack into a total collapse. The formula, he insists, remains the same. Energy times structure times direction equals emergent capabilities. Now, war uses this formula for destruction. But wise leadership applies the exact same elements to build. Leaders who truly understand this, they don't fear frustration. They see it as a signal, as energy. And they build systems like open institutions, real structural reform to metabolize it constructively.
Okay, so this deep dive has really highlighted, I think, a central choice that societies, that leaders, that maybe all of us face. It's this constant tension between entropy, disorder, destruction, and creation. And while war often uses that Ginordo framework, that energy, structure, and direction for destructive ends, truly wise leadership can apply those exact same elements to build something new, something lasting.
That's exactly right. And the Ginordo framework, it isn't just some abstract theory for him. The author presents it as like a universal law. When Ginordo, that combination of energy, structure, direction declines in a system, disorder inevitably spreads. Suffering follows. But, and this is crucial, this path is not inevitable. The same formula can actually reverse the decline, especially through cooperation. Prosperity, in this model, isn't just a goal you hope for. It's the natural outcome when we actually work together, create together, build together with intentional structure and clear direction.
And there's actually an inspiring example of this right there in the source material he uses. The kibbutz movement. Back in the early 20th century, in pre-state Israel, the Ottoman Empire was crumbling, corruption, decay, and a small group of Jewish pioneers realized they just couldn't depend on the empire. They couldn't depend on the existing leadership. So instead, they took leadership into their own hands. They created their own really visionary structure, the kibbutz, with shared ownership, a shared mission that was bigger than any one individual. They directed their energy, their passion into cultivating the land, building these really cohesive communities. And through that sheer emotional energy, combined with the kibbutz structure and a really clear visionary direction rooted in ideals like equality and justice, they managed to transform all that frustration into creative action, into real prosperity. They basically defied the despair that was all around them at the time. They were practicing Ginordo in its purest form, really.
Yeah, and what that example really highlights is that leadership isn't just about presidents or prime ministers, right? It exists at every single level of society, in villages, in businesses, within families, in social movements. Innovation, real change, often begins from the ground up, from individuals and communities who just refuse to wait for salvation from above and instead take action, create the structures, provide the direction needed to make change themselves.
So here's maybe a final provocative thought for you listening to this. Think about those powerful emotions: frustration, fear, hope. They're not just personal feelings, are they? They can be the fuel for some of the most significant shifts in human history, for good or bad. By contrast, contentment or maybe hopelessness, they just tend to invite stagnation.
Yeah.
So maybe consider, where is your own energy being directed right now?
Absolutely. The core message, I think, is this. The future doesn't belong to those who just lash out in fear or frustration. It belongs to those who learn how to manage that tension, how to harness that energy, and use it to build, to create, and to grow. Ultimately, really is our choices, the choices we make about structure, about direction, and about leadership at all levels that truly determine what kind of future we create.